Welcome to the Central Seminary podcast. Thanks for joining us today as we discuss biblical and theological issues relating to life and ministry. This podcast is a ministry of Central Baptist Theological Seminary in Plymouth, Minnesota. To learn more about Central Seminary, visit our website at www.centralseminary.edu. My name is Jared, and I'll be your host. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Central Seminary podcast. Today we have our guest with us, Dr. Matt Morell. He is the president of Central Seminary, and he is the pastor of Fourth Baptist Church, the church that shares the building with Central Seminary. We're joined by a couple doors, which usually are open. I'm told in the past they may have been closed, but same building here. Dr. Matt, Pastor Matt, why don't you share with us how long you've been here at Fourth and maybe how long you've been the president of Central Seminary?
Well, thank you, Jared. It's great to be with you on the podcast today. God brought our family to Fourth Baptist Church June 1st of 2008. At the time, Dr. Kevin Bowder served as the president of Central Seminary. Grateful for the warm relationship that we share. Following Kevin Bowder, Dr. Sam Horn served as the president for 4 years, and then following his presidency, the board of Central Seminary reverted back to the historic model of having the senior pastor at Fourth Baptist Church also serve as the president of Central Seminary. Previously, my predecessors, Dr. R.V. Clearwaters, Dr. Doug McLaughlin, Ernest Pickering, these men served in both capacities as pastor and president. And so I assumed the presidency of Central Seminary as well as my pastorate about 6 years ago now. And I'm so grateful to be able to serve in these ways.
Could you, if you had to put a percentage on it, could you say what percentage of your time is spent on the pastoral side versus the seminary side?
Sure. My first love and priority is pastoring Fourth Baptist Church. I'm a pastor. I'm not an academic. However, in that Central Seminary is housed and hosted by Fourth Baptist Church here in our facility, and because of the symbiotic relationship we have and such, there is some strategic value in having this hybrid or dual role position. On any given week, I might spend 10 or 20% of my time serving Central Seminary. But if and when there is a calendar conflict or a necessary decision to make, I lean toward my care of the Fourth Baptist Church. I'm grateful for all of the other faculty and staff that we have at Central, Dr. Brett Williams as our provost, Dr. John Pratt as our dean, and the rest that are able to really keep all the activity of the seminary in motion without me.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that. Let me just point our listeners to our website, centralseminary.edu, where you can find more info about the seminary itself. You can also find a page on there for our podcast, so if you haven't subscribed yet, you can use that page to subscribe. We also have a few newsletters or emails that we send out. One is just a weekly Central Seminary update. You can find a way to subscribe to that on our website. Also is our Nick of Time article started by Dr. Kevin Bowder, and that comes out every Friday, and he from time to time will have other professors from the seminary writing for that, but if you want to sign up for the Nick of Time, that's a great resource available to you. Before we talk about the main point for today, why don't we talk about some books? Are there any books that you're reading or books that you're anticipating their release that you can read?
Sure. Jared, I've been reading a book titled Wise Counsel, and this is a collection of letters from John Newton to John Ryland Jr. Of course, we're familiar with John Newton, author of Amazing Grace, the slave trader turned servant of God. And he had a very warm and close relationship with John Ryland. Of course, Newton was an Anglican, Ryland was a Baptist, and there was maybe 25 years of age between them, but they were very close friends. And Newton and Ryland really enjoyed some great deep correspondence. And this book, Wise Counsel, edited by Grant Gordon, is a collection of those letters. In fact, there's more than 80 letters, a correspondence between the two of them. And as I read it, I just marvel and even lament at the the depth of our correspondence today. It's maybe a brief email, a quick text, but these men of God corresponding with each other really developed just a real deep friendship. That's titled Wise Counsel. Another book I've been just picked up and reading. It's was written 10 years ago now, but it's titled Resilient Ministry, What Pastors Told Us About Surviving and Thriving. And really, it was a project, a research project that a team of authors did with a variety of different cohorts of pastors to understand the stresses and the challenges they have. And I'm not yet quite finished reading it, but it's really been helpful. Resilient Ministry.
Okay, and that book would be helpful for our topic today.
It would be, yes. In fact, very relevant.
Yeah, well, our topic at hand is how to keep your pastor and what has been called the Great Resignation, kind of some trends that are going on right now in pastoral ministry, how to think through them, how we can maybe speak some truth to pastors who might be going through some of that, and how we can minister to church members and churches who are experiencing either a pastor who has left or they are in a place where they say, we don't want to lose our pastor. What can we do? So, Pastor Matt, can you talk to us a little bit about what has been called the Great Resignation? What are some factors that you think may have contributed to the turnover in pastors right now? Just talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, Jared, on a large scale in our country here over the last couple of years, there has been an exit from the workforce. And a lot of that is due to COVID and the consequences there, some of the economic dynamics that are taking place. And for whatever reason, millions of people have exited the workforce. They've pivoted. They've changed careers. They're working from home. They've gotten creative in pursuing other points of employment for a variety of different reasons. But in parallel, a similar thing is happening among Christian ministry and those in vocational ministry. And there's a lot of literature that's been generated here recently about this great resignation or this this shifting of people out of vocational ministry. In fact, Barna has done some studies and has assembled a bunch of numbers. And of course, numbers can be used to make the case for a lot of different things. But the numbers are alarming about those that are exiting Christian ministry, and it's kind of getting the tag of the Great Resignation. Mm-hmm. And it's partly resignation, it's partly a reshuffling for a lot of different reasons, and so it's something that's worth our talking about today.
Yeah, and I think one of the articles that you and I looked over in preparation for this rephrased it as a reshuffling, mm-hmm. and how some pastors aren't necessarily leaving ministry or taking a break from ministry. They're just changing assignments, which we're not here to say that that's always wrong. Sometimes God leads people, but maybe given our culture today, it's happening a lot more, and maybe that could be a negative trend. How do you think COVID has played into all of this?
Well, I think in a very big way. The last 2 years of pastoral ministry have been difficult. It's been a difficult decision-making environment. It's been difficult in that churches have been divided. It's been very divisive. The COVID matter, the masking mandates, the vaxxing, been very divisive among churches. Pastors trying to navigate the conflicting information that's presented by government agencies as well as medical institutions, and even promoted on social media. There has been decline in numbers. In many cases, there's been maybe even financial duress because of the larger fallout. And so it's been a hard couple years. And I'm only 24 years into my pastoral ministry career, but I have spoken with my peers and those that are well beyond me in age, some who have even said the last 2 years have been the most difficult years of ministry in all of their pastoral career.
Yeah, and without really getting into the politics, church politics of COVID, I think all pastors have experienced the reality that the way you navigated COVID is always going to upset somebody. There's no way out of conflict for such a volatile issue, and so many men in ministry are experiencing, well, I'm trying to do the best job I can. Seminary did not prepare me for a worldwide pandemic.
Right.
I take this approach and I make these people unhappy, or I take this approach and I make these people unhappy. And there's a lot of conflict in churches. There's a lot of anger. Interestingly enough, just last week I recorded a podcast episode with Dr. Nicholas Ellen on the topic of anger. And we noted how there are just a lot of angry people in churches today.
Yeah.
And that could play into some of what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I want to be always mindful that these dynamics are not political, they're not medical, but there's a real spiritual battle that's happening. And if Satan can disrupt, disturb, divide churches over any issue, in this case it happens to be some of the COVID thing and some of the politics that surround it, he can achieve victory in our churches. And pastors have labored hard to shepherd flocks that are scattering or divided, or in some cases even devouring each other. And that's a heavy burden. In fact, I've got before me some statistics from Barna. Barna did, of course, always the surveys and the polls that they're always doing. A year ago, 29% of pastors were seriously thinking about leaving the ministry. Okay, so that puts us in early 2021. Fast forward a year now, currently, that number has jumped to 38%.
Wow.
And so there is a trend, even in this last year, of pastors that are tempted toward this great resignation or reshuffling because of fatigue, maybe burnout, disillusionment, hurt, and such. And so it's a real problem.
So we're talking about men who are leaving ministry altogether, or changing their assignments to another church. Are there men available to take their place? Are we facing a supply issue when it comes to pastors and men in ministry?
That's a great question, Jared. And I think you, as you have a pulse on what's happening, you intuitively know that to be the case. There are more churches needing pastors than there are pastors to fill those pulpits. And this has been a trend, I think, that certainly predated COVID. It's not a modern phenomenon, recent phenomenon here in the last few years. I even think of Woodrow Kroll, I think, wrote a book some years ago called The Vanishing Ministry, and acknowledged that there were fewer and fewer men being called into pastoral ministry or obeying that call, similarly with those going to the mission field. And so consequently, there has been closure of Bible colleges and seminaries, and there is a dearth of those pursuing pastoral ministry. And we experience that here at Central Seminary. Often churches will call looking for recent graduates. It appears that most all of our students, current students, are already placed in ministry. Our graduates are already placed in ministry. And so we lack the names to provide to churches in many cases who are looking for pastors.
Yeah, and I've heard varying statistics that there's maybe one pastor for every 5 churches that's looking, or I've heard 1 to 10. I've even heard in conservative circles like ours, 1 to 50, where college or seminary presidents are being sought by as many as 50 churches, and they only have a handful of names, 2, 3, 4 names to give them. Right. So there are some effects of what we see going on today. What has Central Seminary's experience been through all of this? I think it's interesting to note how we see some of this in relation to our student population.
Yeah, the demographics of our student population have changed over the years. Back in my day, or I might even say our day, it was common for a seminary student to come directly from Bible college in his early 20s. But that has changed anymore. A young man might graduate from his undergrad program $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in debt, marry a girl who's equally in debt, and decide that they need to spend a few years working to pay off their student loans, which is admirable. However, life then happens. The baby happens. They purchase a home. They get involved in either secular or ministerial vocation, and so then it's some years later that they circle back, knowing that they need to tool up further and begin working on an MA or an MDiv here at Central. The average age of our students now is in their 30s, no longer in their 20s, and that's because men have circled back knowing that they need some more education. And we're grateful for that, but that is a shift in demographics and some challenges associated with that.
Yeah, and so we're seeing men who are seasoned in ministry, in many cases, men who've been in ministry 10, 15, 20 years, recognizing I need more education, coming back to Central, and praise God for technology. We're able to help them work towards a degree without having them move to Minneapolis.
Absolutely. In fact, that's been a game changer for us and for so many students is the distance education, the online, what we do in a synchronous format. So every student is live in the classroom rather than binging on recorded lectures. They're part of a class discussion. They're live with the teacher, interacting with fellow students and the professors while remaining in their place of ministry around the country and around the world. And so by God's grace, it's really facilitated those who are in ministry, and I would even encourage those that are listening to this podcast who might value some additional education. Take a class where you're at. You don't need to move to Minneapolis, and we'd love to have you part of this community of learning here at Central Seminary.
Yes. Yep. Are there any books that you could recommend to pastors who are caught in the middle of this, who are struggling? Maybe there's conflict in their church, and they're not sure. Do they push through it, or do they look for a different assignment? Do they put the feelers out? Do they get their resume together? Are there any recommended books for that, or what advice do you have for someone in that situation?
Yeah, that's good, Jared, because I don't want to only curse the darkness, and I don't want to only complain or criticize about the trends that are occurring. I want to encourage men and give them tools, resources, hope. I would cite Kent Hughes' book, Liberating Ministry from the Success Syndrome.
Yes.
And it's perhaps a book that needs to be read and reread and reread every other year in pastoral ministry. I think it's maybe been out for 20 or 30 years now. I think it's been updated. But Liberating Ministry from the Success Syndrome, that's a trap that all of us fall into. But I would encourage any pastor who's got his resignation prepared on Sunday morning, on Monday morning, right? Mondays are when we all submit our resignation.
Don't do it on a Monday.
Don't do it on a Monday. Now, it may be, in fact, the right thing to do. It may be in the perfect will of God that you need to resign or move, to reshuffle, or whatever the case. And so I don't want to unnecessarily burden every pastor against that. However, labor through that decision with counsel, be deliberate, and circle back to your calling. I love how Paul just stirs up Timothy again to remember his calling. And maybe it is that a pastor needs to pivot or reshuffle or step away for some period of time. But if, in fact, God has called them to pastoral ministry, that's not something you escape lightly or quickly. And I think there's a lot, and maybe we can talk about this even going forward, what pastors can do or what churches can do to make that relationship endure.
Yes. And I would note, I think your advice is good. We're not saying don't leave,
right,
or you can't leave,
right.
But be very careful, and if you can stick it out,
yes.
maybe you should do that.
Yes,
and God will make it clear.
Right.
God will make it clear, and I've experienced that in my own life with certain ministry transitions. And you gave me the same advice that you just talked about. If you can stick it out, stick it out. And it wasn't very long after that God made it clear that He was moving us on. Can you talk about maybe some dangers in the type of ministry philosophy that says I'm going to jump around a lot in ministry?
Sure. Ideally, from my perspective, the fruit of an enduring ministry is the sweetest. If I were to make a jump, a shift, a change every few years, and again, citing statistics of the brevity of pastoral tenure, I'm at a church for 3 years, I'm at a church for 4 years. Ideally, God would give pastors 20, 30 churches a lifetime with their shepherds and their elders. But, I've often quipped that the first year a pastor with his church, he gets to know them. The second year, they get to know him. The third year, he decides if he wants to stay. The fourth year, they decide if they want him to stay. And the fifth year, ministry can begin. And I recognize that's artificial in some sense. But think about pastoral ministry in the 5th year or the 10th year or the 15th year, where you perhaps have baptized a young convert, and then you've officiated at their wedding ceremony, and then you've bounced their baby on your knee, and then you've been at their bedside, comforting them through some surgery, and then maybe you've performed a family funeral for them. And over the course of those years, the depth of shepherding really can go to a whole new level. And that's what I aspire for. And if the Lord would grant me that would be a blessing.
Right. And I think the statistic keeps going down, but I think recently the latest I heard is that the average tenure of a pastor is like 18 months.
Yes, I've heard those same numbers, and I cringe to believe it, but in fact, that may be true. And I want to be careful not to throw stones, at those that do make. God does move His servants around,
yes.
And God does have different assignments for pastors. I mean, we could even cite the Apostle Paul, who was always on the move as a church planting missionary, and so none of us would disparage the tenure that he spent, in some of those cities in Asia Minor. But I think that we need to make every effort to persevere, even through seasons of COVID or division, even through dry spells, in season and out of season, the highs and the lows, to persevere as we're able.
Right. And I think we are acknowledging that sometimes God does move people even before they're ready, but we are emphasizing the importance of trying to stick it out. I know when I came to my church, knowing that statistic at the time when I came, I think it was 2 years the average pastor stayed. I kind of made a secret pact with my wife and and God that I can work through anything for 5 years.
Yes.
And I remember, and maybe this is prideful arrogance, but I remember hitting year 2 and thought, yes, I made it year 2. I'm not going to be one of the statistics for that. And in my situation, after year 5, God clearly moved us on, and so I was happy to be able to make that 5-year goal. That, and it's just an arbitrary number, but I thought, that's a respectable amount of time. Yep. I'm gonna do whatever it takes to stay 5 years, and we understand that maybe not everyone can do that. A couple books that I had written down that I wanted to acknowledge: Dangerous Calling by Tripp, great book. For pastors or for church members, because I think it gives an insight into pastoral ministry that maybe church members don't always have. So, Dangerous Calling. A book that I haven't read, but it's been recommended to me, is When Sheep Bite, for pastors who are struggling through some of that conflict relationship issues. Then another book that was recommended to me, Red Light, Green Light, Discerning the Time for a Change in Ministry by John R., don't know how to say his name, Cionca, Cionca, was recommended to me by another pastor who had gone through a hard time, and it was recommended to him, and the book just kind of gives some red lights and green lights, a checklist, if you will. I think there's 15 or so on how to evaluate whether it's time to go, what's happening here and what's happening there. And for me personally, it was very helpful.
Good.
I'd say it's more on the practical side. It's not going to do a biblical exposition of the pastoral ministry and God's called you here and you need to stay, those type of things. It's going to look at trends and how things have been going in the church. But for me, it was very helpful. And when I did the checklist, so to speak, I got like 73 or 75% go. It was like a very high percentage, and my wife did it and got, pretty similar things. Now, we're not saying that this is the will of the Lord through the Holy Spirit of this book, but I think it's helpful because sometimes when you're going through those difficult times, your judgment can be clouded.
Sure.
And that's why I think it's important, like you said, have guys that you can talk to.
Sure.
Have men who you can say, hey, here's what's going on at church.
Right.
Should I stay or should I go? Have you seen this? How do I work around this? Help me navigate this.
Yes, absolutely. And I would also say this to the hurting pastor. I would encourage him that great men of God throughout all of biblical history and church history have had lows, have had dark days, valleys. And so it is not uncommon to struggle with your calling or discerning God's will for you in the pressure cooker of pastoral ministry. There's nothing necessarily wrong with you. This is part of the territory, and we endure hardship as good soldiers of Jesus Christ in many cases, but I would encourage them with that. I would also have a word of encouragement for the churches, and I don't know where you want to take this conversation, Jared, but maybe even before we conclude, how can churches bless their pastors in ways to keep them?
Yeah, that's exactly where I wanted to go. Maybe there are church members listening. We focused on the pastoral side, but yes, we want to reach church members who are thinking through, maybe you're hearing this and you're like, oh, wow, I don't even know what my pastor's going through right now, but there could be some tough stuff, and I really appreciate him, and I don't know how he's feeling, and I don't want him to go.
Sure.
How can churches and church members invest in their pastors to keep them for a longer tenure?
Good. I'm mindful of Ephesians chapter 4, where the Apostle Paul explains that God has gifted to the church pastors, teachers. And so for the churchman, for the layman who is listening to this podcast, know that your pastor is God's gift to you and your church. And God has gifted you, pastors and teachers, for your equipping and for your maturation, your maturity there in Ephesians 4. And so consequently, I think there are ways that you can put the golden handcuffs on your pastor. And by that, I don't simply mean financially. Take care of your pastor financially. But there are so many things you can do to help him be successful. Of course, praying for him, I think we know that that's a given. I'm always so blessed when a church member engages me about my preaching or teaching. It says, hey, pastor, you said this, I heard this, that resonated with me, and they talk to me about that. That is so much more meaningful than simply greeting me at the door and saying, hey, good sermon. But hey, this really impacted me and challenged me. That gives me the gratification and fulfillment that my ministry of the word is being helpful to them.
Yes.
Of course, I mentioned praying, caring for a pastor financially, caring for a pastor's family, making investments in a pastor, whether it's resources for his library or conference opportunities and such. But the return on investment that a church makes in their pastor shepherds will only circle back to benefit the church. I'm blessed in my case. Fourth Baptist Church has showered me with love and encouragement and blessing. And in my days of discouragement or of need, of insecurity, there are folks that have just been so supportive and kind of me. And so I'm grateful for them, and I want to speak well of them and thank the Lord for them. Those are the golden handcuffs that keep me. So when I get the greener grass syndrome or the success syndrome, and I measure myself against others, that's not wise, or when there are difficult circumstances, I'm strengthened by our church's care of me.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that healthy churches come from healthy leaders. And if our leadership isn't healthy, our church might not be healthy. Sure. And we can have a part in helping our leaders to be healthy.
Yes. And
giving them what they need, whether it be financial or encouragement. I know when I was pastoring, I had a folder in my inbox entitled Encouraging Correspondences.
Yep.
And there were certain people who would write me emails or send me texts and have a constant dialogue about sermons. Oh, even just down to like a joke I told. Oh, that really made me laugh, or that sermon illustration hit home, or boy, this really stuck out to me. And that can be so helpful for pastors just to say, wow, people are listening.
Yes.
and they're dialoguing with me. I listened to a podcast on the drive-in this morning, and they were talking about a related topic, and something they said really stood out to me. They said, if the people are far from God, no leader can save them. And it was talking about how so many times we put so much pressure on a high-powered visionary leader who's going to solve all the problems of the church. But sometimes we might need to look inside because we might be the problem. And I wrote down James 3:16, where jealousy and faction are, there is confusion in every vile deed. And we talked about already the anger and the conflict in the church. And when that's there, according to James 3:16, there's a lot of other stuff too.
Sure.
Sometimes the best way we can minister to our pastor is to take care of our stuff and to be the church body to the rest of the body and take care of other stuff.
Sure.
If you have a chance to listen to the podcast on anger with Dr. Ellen, we were talking about this very thing, about how to deal with angry people in the church. And he was noting how sometimes we just need to be what the body ought to be to those other people who are angry. We need to call them out. We need to Matthew 18 them and say, look, this isn't right. Do you recognize what this is doing? And not just set the responsibility for our church on our leadership. Yes, they do have a responsibility, but we're also a body as well. We have a responsibility to one another to take care of stuff and our stuff, because when one member's hurting, the whole body hurts.
Yeah, absolutely. The mutual care of the body for the body, the one another passages. And again, that is the goal of pastoral ministry, is to equip the saints to do that work of the ministry. So all of it doesn't have to go through the office of the pastor, but whether it's deacons or whether it's other older men and women, godly men and women who are caring for one another, they can do so much of the work of the ministry as they're equipped.
Yes. So are there any books that you've seen that you would recommend to church members who are approaching this from the person in the pew position? We want to encourage our pastor, or we don't want to lose our pastor. Can you point them to any resources?
You know, I'm thinking of some of what 9 Marks has published on healthy church. And I think as church members walk humbly with their God, in the Spirit of God, controlled by the Spirit, faithfully exercising their giftedness within the church, I think it can be a beautiful relationship between pastor and people. And I am bullishly optimistic, stubbornly optimistic that that God's institution for this age, the local church, with appointed leadership, the eldership, the pastors of a church, can thrive. And so I look forward to that. I would recommend Healthy Church, published by 9 Marks, and what it is to be a healthy church member companion book there as well.
Yep, and I just wrote down one little It's more of a booklet, or you might even think of it as a prayer guide. It's called Praying for Sunday by Michael Faberez. You can pick it up online for, $6 or $7. But it gives you prayer points, how to pray for your pastor during the week during sermon prep, how to pray for the delivery of the Sunday morning sermon, how to pray for the Sunday worship and that the Holy Spirit would work. And I found that helpful as well.
Good.
So before we close our discussion, one question I like to end the podcast with is works of God. Are there any works of God that you would like to give thanks or praise for that He's done recently in your life or your family's life or in the life of Fourth Baptist Church or Central Seminary?
Sure. Thank you for that. I need to pinch myself and slap myself to realize how God has blessed abundantly and has showed Himself mighty in my life personally, as with my family and our church. As I look back over the last couple of years, the COVID years, 2020, 2021, and all of the disruptions and all of the uncertainties, God has just sustained us through it all. And there have been consequences. There have been people that have fallen away. I've done 7 funerals already this year. One of those specifically a COVID funeral. There's been hurt. There's been consequence. There's been difficulty, as we maybe cited at the beginning of this podcast. But God has proven Himself to be faithful. He's met our needs. He sustained us, and I give Him all the credit and the glory for that. It's not the arm of the flesh that has sustained us, but it's His grace.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you, Pastor Matt, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Central Seminary podcast. Our mission at Central Seminary is to assist New Testament churches in equipping spiritual leaders for Christ-exalting biblical ministry. Since its founding in 1956, Central Seminary has sought to provide serious students of God's Word with robust theological education as they prepare for ministry. We have many graduates around the world who are serving in countless ways to spread the gospel and proclaim the name of Jesus Christ. Find out more at our website, centralseminary.edu. Next time on the Central Seminary podcast.
I think if Arius would have been a Central Seminary student, he would have been in a better situation.
I don't need to spend as much time in sermon prep.
He said it takes 10 years to get over where you went to seminary.
So a good seminary, I think, will go out of its way actually to try to counter that elitism.
It's easy to be critical. There's even an elitism that can develop.
That seems to be almost uniquely North American.
I'm not that smart.
Because what we're doing is we're juxtaposing these two things that in Scripture and in Christian history and in Christian experience are never juxtaposed.
You're not going to be able to get that through more book study.
I have to dwell in all these worlds.
But he said, I view part of my sermon prep as going to seminary. Do you have a to-read shelf?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I do, and it is haphazardly stacked.
Books can only take you so far.
Every sermon I come to with a framework, a grid.
Seminary is good at some things. It's actually not good at other things.
Going to seminary isn't necessarily going to make you closer to Jesus.
Seminary equals cemetery.
You don't have to be the one that has to start a false religion.
I know many very brilliant individuals who don't know God.
Look for our next episode on the Central Seminary podcast.